And Grant's just going to tell us all about he's got 2 farms, one at Pascaville and one at Kangaroo Island.
I think we're probably heading to a more regenerative form of agriculture at Pascaville, but we're still quite the opposite on our property on Kangaroo Island. So we're using the northern farm as a bit of a test farm.
And Grant, so can you just tell us about your farms, your farming system, how you got started, what you're doing, that sort of thing? And I think you've got a little presentation.
Right.
So that'd be great. And welcome to some of the Normanville group and a few others. Okay,
so we run a farm on Pascaville, where I sort of live, which is northern York Peninsula over in South Australia. My wife, and we've got 3 kids, and then my brother, his wife and 3 kids live on Kangaroo Island, and we operate the farm all still as one unit. We have 5 full-time staff between the properties. We're cropping 7,000 hectares, and we've been on 5th generation, and we've been on Kangaroo Island since the last 20 years. So this is sort of where we are on the Yorks, and then 2 properties down on Kangaroo Island. We've done this to sort of spread our risk for rainfall. So we vary between 375 mil up north to 675 mil on the west and southwest of Kangaroo Island. So having properties between the 2 places and over a stretch of water obviously has some logistical nightmares. With freight harvest machinery back and forth. It's an earlier season at Pascaville than what it is on Kangaroo Island, but the seeding and spraying and other operations are all sort of coincide. So the only machinery we sort of share that goes between the 2 are the headers and chaser bins and trucks, and we've got a little plane to fly back and forth, and we have to use the ferry to get over and back. So which is the only way of getting to and from the island is on Seedling. So it's quite a monopoly they've got, and they charge accordingly.
Is there a delivery at Kangaroo Island, Grant?
Yes, so there used to be an ABB and then Viterra site. They shut down about 12 years ago. They closed up, and a group of farmers on Kangaroo Island ended up buying that facility, and we now operate it as Kangaroo Island Pure Grain. So all the grain from the island goes to Kingscote, to our storage facility there, and then we bring it back to Adelaide on trucks, and we pack all our own grain and export it all overseas from there. So we own 50% of that Kangaroo Island Pure Grain company. Up at Pascaville, we sort of used to be 100 kilos of DAP down the tube, and then 100 kilos of urea afterwards, and used trace elements. And in 2007, we started using chicken manure from local boiler sheds, straw-based manure. And so for the next sort of 4 years, we halved their granular fertiliser rate till we got down to, in 2011, we started seeding with no granular fertiliser at all, just using the manure, which it took about 4 years to start mineralising and working into our soil and becoming available to the plant. So since then, we've been trialling biological seed dressings, and then we tried some boosting the seed with nutrition this year with a seed boost product, which was just nutrition really. And then we've changed to using all our in-crop nitrogen as a carbon humic acid based nitrogen. So it's 23% nitrogen with carbon and humic acid in. So and then we haven't been using any insecticides since 2018, except for we do use a grub spray on lentils at pod set for grubs. We still haven't been able to find a product or anything biological yet to stop the grubs eating lentils. So rotations have sort of changed a bit. We had 10 years of just lentils, wheat, and we really saw our organic carbon dropping considerably in that rotation. We just weren't adding enough carbon back in our soil with so many legumes. So we've gone back to a cereal legume sort of rotation now. And we use a stripper front to harvest our wheat and barley to keep that stubble there a bit longer so it doesn't break down as fast. And we've got some cover and some food for the microbes still in that legume phase. So also been doing cover crops over the summer. They haven't been that successful. We've had, I think, two crops out of the 4 years we've been doing it haven't even come up. They've just haven't had enough. They came up and sort of died straight away. Like we just didn't have follow-up summer rain. So that's still a bit of a trial error, but the cover crops are certainly working well on Kangaroo. With our manure, like I say, we put out 2.5 tonne of the hectare on every hectare going into crop each year. Manure is a bit like fertiliser. Like you can't put out 20 tonne of the hectare and then not do it for 5 years. It's way too rich for that, and we did some trials at sort of 5 tonne and 10 tonne, and we just had lodge crops and small grain, and it was like putting out 250 kilos of urea. Like it just was too hot. So we have to do it every year, and we do it, and that 2.5 tonne seems to provide the nutrition for about a 3 tonne crop of wheat or barley without any extra nutrition. And on our farms, we sort of average about 4 tonnes. So we usually have to top up with about 50 litres of nitrogen, of UAN or N+ or nowhere else. So the first 5 years, we started using chicken litter. Our KLP increased from 25 to 50. We thought, oh, this is fantastic stuff. And then it's still 50 now after 15 years of continued use. So we sort of hit a bit of a plateau where I don't think the amount of phosphorus when we test the manure, and I don't think a lot of that is becoming available. It gets tied up, gets locked up, and it's not available. So it seems to be enough to grow a crop, but we're certainly not getting more nutrition than we want or than we need. If anything, I'd like to mineralise a bit more of it. But we also lose about half the nitrogen by not incorporating it. On my Nuffield study, I looked at a lot of farms and a lot of data, and if you're not incorporating the manure within 24 hours of application, you lose about half of that manure. And so it's just not practical for us to do that. And also we're in a no-till system with a disc seeder, and we just don't want to, the moisture is much more valuable than the nitrogen that you'd lose. You'd lose 10 mil of moisture trying to incorporate it. yeah, tilling that soil structure as well. So we sort of yeah, we try and capture as much nitrogen when we do spread it by spreading it in cool weather, and when it's not too windy, and into a cover crop if possible. That'll capture a lot more nitrogen if it's into a living crop, or other than that, into stripper stubble, certainly captures a lot more of the nitrogen, and the wind isn't volatilising a lot of that nitrogen off in tall stripper stubble. So, and then obviously the nitrogen that is available depends on how much rain you get for the season, and the organic carbon you've already got in your soil, what mineralisers and what bugs have got there to break that manure down.
Grant, just before you go on, if there's a couple of questions, if you don't mind, if we just ask those couple of questions. Just I'm imagining your Pascaville would be a fairly high pH with some free lime close to the surface, and is that, do you think, and I'm just wondering if you know if you've got a buffering index in regards to your pH, in regards to your phosphorus tie-up. So
the pH at Pascaville ranges from about 7.5 to 8.5, so it's quite alkaline. We have got a lot of country that has got limestone even right to the surface, so there's a lot of free calcium. And the buffering index is about 120, so it's quite ties up quite a lot of P. On Kangaroo Island, we're about 5 to 5.5 pH, and so we do spread lime over there, and yeah, we're not using manure on the island. There's no source over there, so we're still using traditional superphosphate and yeah, some liquid calcium and yeah, DAP sort of products over there.
Yeah, and when you're applying your chicken manure, do you try and do it in front of some rainfall so that you get a bit of washing in, or yeah? Yeah,
we wait until we start spreading manure on the 1st of April, so we leave it as late as possible to then still get over the program. It takes us about 3 weeks to spread 6,000 tonne. So yeah, we just spread for 3 weeks, and we start off spreading on country that's gone in with a legume, which is not as important to capture that nitrogen. We want the phosphorus and the trace elements for that sort of crop, and then we finish off into country that's gone into wheat. So it is as close as we can. By then the season is cooling down. You don't get those hot sort of northerlies in April, and if you're lucky, you do get some rain, and you're starting to get dews and that as well. So, yeah, that's sort of the best we've come up with.
Yeah. Thanks.
But in saying that, if you're a week or if you're 3 weeks, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're only going to lose that ammonia. You're going to lose that ammonia content anyway. So, yeah, we used to try and do it. Yeah, we'd do it right in front of the seeder and that, but you could only do it for a couple of days, and yeah, and so yeah, what I found out is that as long as it's the season's cooling down, and you do get some dew, and it's not anything over 25 degrees, you're losing a lot. You can lose a lot more than 50%. So you can get down to you can keep about 70% of it if you're doing it in less than 20 degree weather, and it's not windy. So yeah.
Yep. Good tips.
Yeah, so rotations on KI, we used to be all canola wheat, and then we really needed a legume option. We tried lentils and chickpeas and all sorts, and they just wouldn't grow in that acidic countries. And fava beans weren't worth enough money by the time we freighted them off the island, it's $70 a tonne to freight grain off of Kangaroo Island. So we had to find a high value crop as a legume. So we started growing broad beans 2012, and now we export all our broad beans to Indonesia, and they go into a snack food industry for human consumption, and they're worth generally $200 to $300 a tonne more than fava beans into that market. So that's been a good fit. But they need a lot of rain. That's high rainfall crop. You couldn't grow broad beans or get the size. You need big beans to get that premium. So if they come back to sort of fava bean size, they go into the fava bean market. So it's really a high value crop based on size, and you've got to have a long, cool finish to grow them, which Kangaroo Island does. We started growing malt barley for Coopers, and now they make a beer that goes to South Korea from Kangaroo Island. So that's been good. And then we also grow some linseed. We've got some paddocks that were deep, sort of gutless sand that we planted perennial kikuyu on, and we sow crops into that. The kikuyu goes dormant over the winter, where we can grow a winter crop, and then during the summer it greens up, and it just holds that soil structure and that sand in place, without drifting away. So that's been quite good. Also sow Super Sudan sorghum, Sprint Sudan sorghum, safflower, and cover crops of turnips and millet, and then we would gist cattle on them on Kangaroo Island.
Grant, does the perennial kikuyu do you grow that at Baskerville as well, or is it just really a?
No, it's just on Kangaroo Island. It's sort of we had some really bad erosion over there on some sand, and we just needed to hold some paddocks together that were just quite deep sand. We've delved a lot of country over there to bring clay up into the sand, but a few paddocks over there we just didn't have any clay close enough to the surface, and so instead of clay spreading them, we thought we'd try and do it with plants, and we planted it down for a year with kikuyu and let that establish, and then once it's established, then we'll just put a gramoxone over it in April, and then sow a crop into it, and then we can harvest that crop off in sort of December and January, and then it greens up again. It's just holding the soil together. So yeah.
Thanks.
Grant, could you just talk about your summer covers on KI and how you manage those, sort of like after your winter crop and before your next winter crop and that sort of thing?
Yep, I can get to all that later on. I've got a whole thing in cover crops later.
Awesome. Okay, great. Yep. Thank you. Yep.
So just touch on our machinery. It's the biggest single cost per year to our business is machinery depreciation. Because we own two different farms and they're not together, we have to double up on a lot of equipment, which is less efficiency. There's also no services for equipment and no dealerships on Kangaroo Island to speak of. So you sort of got to carry a lot of parts and a lot of spares and have relatively new gear rather than fixing stuff because no one's there to fix it. So we run 3 New Holland 9.90 combines. We put about 400 hours a year on each of them. 2 chaser bins. We have a disc seeder, a K-Hard at Baskerville, a 48 metre Sonic at Baskerville, and then we do our spraying and seeding now on KI with a spray plane and a disc chain. So this is our plane. We bought this 4 years ago out of America and put it in a container and brought it back and put it together. And now this does all our seeding on Kangaroo Island. So this is seeding broad beans. Had a lot of trouble sowing broad beans down through a normal air seeder. So you'd always block the hoses and tubes, seed tubes, and it gets quite wet there. We're getting bogged all the time. And had 2 self-propelled boom sprayers, and we kept getting them bogged, and we're using a contractor and plane anyway for when after July to do most things. So we ended up buying a plane, and that system's evolved into, instead of just spraying and spreading fertilizer, it now does all our seeding as well. This is just we've got a video here of us. This is what the country's like on Kangaroo. This is a block of canola. This is spreading urea.
So is that accurate, Grant? Is it easy to get
Yep.
it right?
Yeah,
Looks like it
very
is.
accurate. Yeah, it's all GPSed and coverage mapped, and I got an experienced pilot that knows what he's doing, so I don't fly.
So you just spread it and then you prickle chain it in, did you say?
Yep.
Okay. And that's with everything?
Yep.
And is that economical?
Yeah, so yeah, we bought the plane to try and not get bogged when we're spraying and spreading urea, and then it's sort of evolved into a seeder as well now. So last year we sowed everything with the plane. We sowed our wheat and barley, canola and broad beans all with the plane. Spread all the fertilizer beforehand with the plane. And then we've got 2 Kelly disc chains, which they just cover over the seed. So they just, we don't have to have any trucks in the paddock or trucks at all. We don't need any skilled operators. We don't need to check hoses or see if you've got blocked heads, or don't need to have anyone out there filling at night, or you can just tow a disc chain around, cover over what the plane's done. So the plane can sow about 600 hectares a day. You'll do 300 hectares of fertilizer and then 300 hectares of grain. And then we disc chain that in with 2 chains. So similar capital cost to what an SP boom spray was. So it's 750,000 for the plane, which isn't a lot when you're talking about a brand new nitro every 5 years. We've employed a pilot on a 6-month retainer for the growing season. He lives on Kangaroo in a house, and when he's not flying, he's fishing. Similar fuel, we use about 200 litres an hour of diesel in the plane, but obviously you do a lot more hectares an hour with the plane. Find when we're spraying, say clethodim or spraying in the winter, we might have only got 1 tank out. Once the dew dries up and before the dew comes in, might have only done 70 hectares a day with a ground rig per unit, whereas with the plane in that 3 or 4 hour window, you can do 300 hectares of spraying. A lot lower depreciation. The plane is still worth the same as when we bought it 4 years ago. We had huge depreciation on all other equipment. So spreaders and boom sprayers and seeders all depreciate like nothing. A lot lower repairs and maintenance. The insurance is a lot higher on a plane. People keep crashing them. So the insurance has gone from 30,000 a year the first year we had it to 60,000 a year now. So that's not a good sign. But yeah, the efficiency is just what we own it for. It's cut our seeding back to 4 weeks instead of 7, and just all our spraying and spreading operations are on time and in good weather.
So you don't use it at Pascaville though?
I'll bring it up here to do it if we have a mouse plague, or if we need to. It'll drop mice bait for a day over the whole farm, or it'll come up and do all our fungicide work if we've got to do fungicide work in wheat or anything, but we don't do a lot of that now. Primarily it stays on Kangaroo, but yeah, we have added up on occasions. We've got an airstrip on both farms, so yeah.
So would the different soil type make that less viable there or not?
Oh no, not soil type, but rainfall. Like we couldn't waste the amount of water by dischaining like a no-till, zero-till disc seeder just is a lot, like gets the crop out of the ground on minimal moisture, whereas in 650 mil rainfall, you're actually trying to dry it out a bit. So it's a completely different system. We're not worried about conserving that moisture. Getting too wet's our problem, not too dry, whereas up at Paddocks, it's always too dry.
Yeah.
So I'll just touch on what I did with my Nuffield Scholarship in 2018. Had 16 weeks of international travel through the UK, France, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, America and New Zealand. I looked at ways of storing manure and application of manure. I looked at cover, relay, companion and intercropping and different systems, diversity, biology, and with the end goal of building carbon and improving our water holding capacity and water use efficiency. Thank you to New Farm who supported me and gave me the scholarship. So I wanted to find out how do we significantly increase our water use efficiency and hold more water in our soil. What role does biology have in soil health, and can we keep it alive over our hot, dry summers in South Australia? We'll cover crops health in that scenario, and how can we use our manure more efficiently when we're no-till cropping. So the reason I chose that topic, I guess, was we were having a discussion before I started about regenerative and whether we are regenerative farmers or whether we aren't. And I think to step back and say, well, are we sustainable farmers? And everyone sort of 10 years ago said, oh yeah, we're sustainable, we're doing this, we're doing that. But my question is if we're truly sustainable, why do we always have to keep buying land to keep up with the terms of trade? Like to buy a $700,000 header or a $700,000 boom spray, you've got to put it over lots of hectares to warrant having that machinery, and that's not changing. That's getting worse and worse. The cost of machinery keeps going up. So if we're truly sustainable, why does every generation need more land to be economically viable than the last one? We started off with 100 hectares, and that set up a family, and that was enough to grow food and keep that family. And now we've got 7,000 hectares. It's to me that's probably not a sustainable system. So surely there's a better way of making the resources that we own more profitable than the way we're currently doing it. So that's what I wanted to look into. Probably the one thing that I came back was that our soils need more carbon. That's carbon it's more important than any other nutrient in your soil, and that is what offers the resilience to drought and all these other hosts of diseases and pests and compaction all come from low soil organic carbon. If we got more carbon, we can store more moisture, we can capture more moisture, and we can mineralise more nutrients to grow crops more sustainably rather than adding anything else. So that's probably the key I came back on. I never really gave carbon a lot of thought. It was always about trying to make sure you're not putting out too much nitrogen, make sure you've got enough nitrogen, make sure you've got enough phosphorus, know your trace element's right, And you know, I never really knew that carbon was the linchpin to it all. So everything we do now, all the decisions I make are based on improving the carbon in our soil. And soil biota, plant roots alone only explore 1% of the soil. If you associate those plant roots with fungi, they've got the capacity to explore 20% of the soil. So you just by looking after fungi and getting more fungi in your soil, you've got a huge potential pool there to actually explore more of the soil and capture more moisture and more nutrients without applying them. Soil cover, everyone sort of knows this, but it's probably the easiest way and the most important way to improve your soil health is keep the soil covered, regulates the soil temperature. And yeah, the mistakes we made 10 years ago were growing too many legumes. We weren't growing enough high carbon residue plants, which means we're in that legume rotation, the microbes that were built up by putting all the stubble back in and everything, they were just eating our organic carbon. We weren't increasing our organic carbon. We'd build it up and then have microbes and then they start starving. They didn't have enough carbon. So yeah. Cover crops, looked at plenty of cover crops across all sort of rainfall areas and countries, and I came back that yep, we'll grow these cover crops, and we've had some disasters. We've spent $40 a hectare on seed, and it hadn't rained after we put them in, and it doesn't matter whether we've put them into yeah, lots of stubble and lots of cover and we've or whether they've gone into bare paddocks. Sometimes they just haven't got enough rain. So, but I still believe that in the right circumstances they'll be a good tool. So this year we're gonna go again because it could be a wet summer. The last 3 summers have been quite dry, but the science is quite telling that they will add carbon when you're generally not adding any. If you can grow something over summer, they'll put more carbon in, they'll cycle your nutrients, they'll capture that moisture, which as long as they're terminated at flowering before they go into grain production, they won't use a lot of moisture. They will need moisture, but improving that soil food web and building carbon as a return. Now it'll be a long-term return, but yeah, we've done plenty of trials. I've got some data I'll show you in a minute about what it costs you. So this was a cover crop we grew in 2017. It was a multi-species mix of millet, sorghum, linseed, mung beans, sunflowers, tillage radish, and volunteer lentils. We had good rain to get it up in November. Had another rain in December to keep it going, and then it sort of hayed off. Yeah, by late February it was all done, and it never got to a point where it sort of covered the soil and stopped any evaporation. It did use that moisture to grow, and we had it alongside a chemical fallow in the same paddock, and the following crop. Well, we measured the moisture in March. After we terminated this cover crop, we had 20 mil underneath the cover crop, and in the chem fallow we had 45 mil. And then the following wheat crop, where we had the cover crop, it went 3 tonne, and where we had the chemical fallow, it went 3.5. So that cover crop had cost us the cost of the seed and putting it in, plus half a tonne of wheat yield in that year. The benefit, I don't know what it is yet. It was only 3 years ago. Maybe we'll see something down the track. And yeah, like I say, it wasn't the best at covering the soil, but it did have a green plant and did have roots, sort of growing for longer and building that biology. So yeah, I don't think it was a complete failure, but time will tell. At this stage, you would say it cost us money.
Grant, do you think you see any differences in the last 2 years between those two paddocks, or are they different? Are they treated differently?
No, it was half a paddock was the same with the cover crop, another half wasn't. So it was in the same paddock. It's had the same everything since then. Hasn't yielded any different the last 2 seasons. So they've both been similar. You wouldn't know where the cover crop was and where it wasn't. So it was that 1 year it did cost some yield, but we've had other crops, especially on Kangaroo, where moisture wasn't limiting, where we've seen excellent results. We've had a sorghum crop, multi-species sorghum and turnip crop sown, and then we put into the canola the following year, and the canola out yielded the canola where we had the chemical fallow. So it was a different sort of soil type and different rainfall, but their rain wasn't limiting. So where rainfall is not limiting, I think there is benefits of you're getting a disease break, you're getting more cycling of nutrients, and we had more cover, there. So in that instance, it was the other way around. We yielded more the following year where we had that cover crop, but in a dry land situation where you're looking at conserving as much moisture as possible, I'm just pointing out that these cover crops, they may well be good for your soil, and time will tell, and good for your biology, and they may build organic carbon quicker, but they do come at a cost of cash, the year after. So rather than sort of putting all eggs in one basket in cover cropping, we sort of started companion cropping. I saw this in North Dakota and in UK and in France, where they're growing 2 crops together with the objective to harvest grain of only one of the crops. So the other species is either grazed out or terminated, and it's just there as a companion to do a few things. So companion plants will exchange nutrients, like their roots can touch and they can exchange nutrients and water, whereas like plants, like 2 wheat plants, their roots won't actually touch and share nutrients. They have to scout them for themselves and explore the soil themselves, whereas different plants, their roots will interact. So we've been growing linseed and lentils and linseed and chickpeas for the last 2 years, and we sort of tried the linseed with the chickpeas for a physical disease barrier for ascochyta, so we wouldn't have as much ascochyta go across the fields. We've had 2 dry springs here, so we haven't seen disease anyway since we've been doing it. So I can't comment on whether it's working or not. We just harvest the legume, and then we have the wind up enough to blow the linseed out the back. So we're not trying to harvest that linseed and capture it and clean it out later or anything. It was purely just to add carbon. It leaves more residue after the legume residue, so a more carbon dominant residue. Linseed is like rope. The stubble's quite slow to, it's very high in carbon. It's very slow to break down, so it does leave residue there longer, and so that's the reason why we're doing it in our lentils and chickpeas, is just to get more residue. It doesn't compete very well, so it doesn't really limit the yield of the pulse crop that you're growing it with. We haven't seen any reduction in yield of the pulse since we've been adding linseed. So add some diversity above and below the ground. There is some challenges in having your seeder set up for alternate rows if you want to do it in this instance, or you can just put it all in together and it's all spread out.
So you did the alternate rows mainly for the disease
Yep.
the disease break. And
Yep.
what about having all that seed like into the next year's crop? Does that make any difference?
Yeah, well, it just goes into a wheat crop, and then I'd quite happily have linseed in the wheat as well. It generally doesn't. It'll come up and it'll get sprayed out with your normal broadleaf herbicide in wheat. And yeah, even if it was in the wheat right through to harvest, there's people that I've seen people sow in America linseed in their wheat, and then the same, they just have the wind high enough on the header to blow the linseed out. Linseed's very, very small and light.
Yeah.
It's just like chaff. It's hard to keep in the header when you're trying to harvest it. So there's no problem having that in there, even in your following crop. Yeah. So intercrops are where you've got two crops planted together, and you do want to harvest both crops. And yeah, I guess challenges are harvesting the two together at the right moisture, storing them together, and then cleaning them out afterwards. And some in-crop herbicides you can't use. So this is broad beans and canola. This is a trial we done last year, beanola on Kangaroo, and so this was canola sown into broad bean stubbles. So we had 1,000 hectares of beans go into canola stubble, and we just left the beans, the volunteered beans in it, instead of using any Lontrel or any pre-emergent to get them out. So yeah, we applied 69 units on the beanola for the year. It averaged 2.6 tonne. We cleaned out 300 kilos of broad beans for every 2.3 tonne of canola. So yeah, it was dominantly canola, but where the canola was poor, where it got waterlogged, or where bugs ate it, or the beans were quite good. So the beans are a good size, and they didn't have any disease on them either. So it was quite interesting to see the complementary nature of these crops. And monocrop beans usually get about 3 fungicides over there, and they get black spot and everything else, whereas the beans in the canola didn't get any fungicide, and they were quite clean. So in comparison, we had 140 hectares of canola where we did get rid of the beans out of it. We ended up having to give that more nitrogen, and it yielded less. So the beans were supplying some nitrogen for that crop, for that canola, and the gross margin was sort of $170 a hectare more by leaving the beans in there as a companion crop. We did store the beans and canola together. We had a couple of thousand tonnes, so we put it all in silo bags, and we were testing it. The beans went in, or we harvested the canola at about 8% moisture, and the beans were 14% when we repped it. And we were really concerned that the moisture out of the beans might go in the canola, but we had them in silo bags for a couple of months before we got around to pulling them out and cleaning them, and we checked it every week, the moisture in the bag, and there was no cross contamination. There was no, the moisture didn't go up. The canola came out at about 7.8, and the beans came out at about 13.8. So it didn't worry storing them together. Oh.
Oops, that's better.
So what have we done since I come back from My Nuffield? We purchased a stripper front to keep as much long residue as possible. We've purchased a seed terminator on one of our headers to try and combat weeds without spraying them and reduce our pre-emergence. We're using 0 row spacing, which helps a lot with competition out of the plain, which has been an added bonus, I guess, of having rather than having things in rows. We used to have quite a lot of slugs that would eat canola. They'd follow up the row, the seeder row, like the press wheel row, and they'd just eat every canola along there. Whereas when everything's spread out in 0 rows, they can't find it. Like they won't bear out whole rows. So that's been an added bonus. We haven't had to use any slug bait for a couple of years now on canola. We've been planting these companions.
Grant, can you just tell me what weeds, what are your main weed problems?
Main weeds are ryegrass, and then we have bifora on York Peninsula and mustard, lettuce. They're getting quite bad in lentils. Like we've been growing that many lentils that they're sort of getting a bit herbicide tolerant, I think. And then on Kangaroo, we have, it's mainly ryegrass, bit of radish over there. That's, yeah.
Is it resistant ryegrass, I'm assuming, if you got?
Yep. It's resistant to all, well, it's even getting a bit resistant to clethodim, I think. So,
and do you think that Seed Terminator does a good job?
well, we've only just bought it, so this will be our first year with it. So
okay.
I'm hoping it will, but yeah, we had some resistance tests done on ryegrass this year, and yeah, we've lost, well, it's 50% resistant to box of gold and 80 to trefoil, and yeah, we're getting sort of 20 to 30% of our ryegrass now getting resistant to clethodim. So we've certainly got to do things differently to what we have been. So
you had 3 headers, I thought. So are you putting it just on one and trying it in a particular paddock?
Yeah. So at this stage, we've just put it on one, and we'll do the work where we know we've got problems or the bad paddocks or patches. That one will go and do them, and then yeah, the other 2, if it works and if we have a good season, we might put another 2. But they're about 105,000 each. So
yeah, they're expensive.
Yeah, one at a time.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, we haven't been using any seed dressings except for nutrition for the last 4 years. And this year, instead of using any insecticides or fungicides, I've been using fish, kelp, and molasses to try and just boost the sort of bricks levels in our crops rather than a fungicide. So it's too early to tell yet. We'll yield them out and find out. But at this stage, I think it's been working pretty well. Beans have had 2 applications of kelp and lentils have had 1 of kelp and 1 of fish, and we've been used some molasses, sprayed that out to help pollination, attract bees and stuff, and make the leaves real sugary, so the aphids and that wouldn't like them. So it seems to have worked, but it's a bit early to tell yet. It's just a trial in motion. Still have quite a few issues with root diseases. We got a lot of rhizoctonia this year. The last 2 dry seasons had a lot of build up of rhizoctonia, and because we don't till anything, we're not breaking up that hyphae, and we're having some root disease problems early on. So the manure supplies a lot of nutrition late, like as it mineralizes and as it rains, it releases a lot of its nutrients, but it doesn't provide a lot of early nutrition. So not sowing with any fertilizer down the tube, the crops are quite slow to get started, and we haven't had the last 3 seasons. We haven't had any summer rain or any spring rain really to mineralise a lot of manure or get that mineralisation happening. So when we're sowing a crop in May, it's going in with very little nutrition. The manure just hasn't been enough. So I think that may be why this Rhizoctonia and we're having root disease problems. There's just not enough nutrition early to get those roots off to a good healthy start. So I'm hoping it's just seasonal, and as if we get a wet summer, we'll start mineralising a lot more nutrition, and that'll help. Other than that, we might have to start putting out an early foliar nitrogen and zinc, especially on barley. That seems to be where we're having Rhizoctonia issues. And then I'm still researching a lot of what's a good companion seeding rates of those companions, and what is actually happening when we use herbicides and fungicides on our biology. So we've taken like microbial tests of our soils. Done that 3 years ago, so we'll do that every 5 years to find out the balance of fungi and bacteria, and find out whether we're improving things or whether we're status quo, or whether things are going backwards. So we've got a benchmark now to start from and find out what some of these things are actually doing to the biology.
Is there anyone from SARDI or someone helping you do that?
No, I've just got an agronomist who I sort of work with, and then we take tests and I send them down to MicroWise testing place. So I'm just working with a couple of other private sort of guys, a bloke that's from the CSIRO, but he consults on an hourly sort of rate, so I'm using him.
Are we allowed to know who they are, or are they a secret?
I know you can. Hugh, or Chris Davey is my agro, and he's quite good from YP Ag.
Yes.
And Hugh Warwick, I think, from CSIRO.
Yeah.
Will work.
Yeah.
Or will work.
I can let you know, but just
Grant, do you know whether the fungi you're measuring is good or bad? Like, are you doing tests that kind of tells your function?
Yeah, I didn't know when I had a test, and I sort of went and got someone to tell me what they all mean. But yeah, our fungi bacteria were about 1-to-1, which is very good, apparently. Usually most soils are bacterial dominant. Of course, you want to do the test at the same time every time. So we did it in spring when things were sort of looking really good and we had a good profile of moisture and things were cranking. So I think if you did the test in the middle of summer, you'd find we're really bacterial dominant. So I think that changes so often through the season of what's growing and how it's growing and how wet it is, that has a huge impact on what species are there and how many of what. So yeah.
Did you say what test you're actually doing, Grant?
It's a microbiological test. And yeah, you just send some soil down to it's got MicroWise in Adelaide, and they just tell you a whole host of different things, and cinamites and all these sort of things.
And have they got a rating for those things, or are they just telling you what's there?
It comes back with a graph of what each sort of species you've got and all the bacillus and everything else, and then on the next report page it comes with a sort of heap of pie graphs which says it's good, it's bad, it's excellent, it's terrible, and a drought meter of how resilient your soil is and how balanced it is, and so you get all these sort of indicators with it. It's quite good. They do, the data you don't really know whether it's good or not, but then it comes all in these pie graphs, which which sort of have these red to green indicators to say sort of where you're at. Yeah.
And how much is the test? Do you remember? Or
Oh, it wasn't expensive. It was $150 or something per test, I reckon. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 3 years ago. So, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's about it anyway. We did do some tests, like we did a replicated trial this year on stripper front stubble versus draper cut stubble versus baled off stubble in a couple of paddocks, and yeah, that was quite interesting. After we had about 25 mil in December and then another 25 mil, I reckon, in February, and we did the test in March, and the stripper front stubble had I think that had about 40 mil under it that it had captured, or that was in the soil. Once we dried the soil out, it had 40 mil. The draper cut stuff was 30, and the baled off stuff was 20. So we'd captured 20 mil more after only 50 mil of rain over 3 months under stripper front stubble versus baled off. And surprisingly, we'd even caught 10% or 10 mil more under draper versus 12-inch cut high draper front stubble, and the rest spread at the back. So in our area on the York Peninsula, it gets quite windy. And I reckon the wind is what evaporates a lot of our moisture away, not so much the sun. So it was just an interesting observation that I thought I'd share too, that yeah, we'll probably end up buying a couple more stripper fronts, I think, because that's yeah, 10 mils, 10 mil, and yeah, certainly you can see it even. We could see it this year where we wrecked with the stripper front versus the draper front. The stripper was a lot better when it was real dry.
You don't have any issues getting through the stubble with the stripper front?
No, we use a disc seeder, and that's quite simple. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, has anyone got any questions? And I think, was there a few on the chat?
I think Felicity answered mine. I was just asking about the intercropping, whether it's at Pasky or on KI, but she said it was Pasky because you drilled it in rather than aerial sown.
No, the intercropping, the canola and beans was on Kangaroo. So yeah, they were beans were left after the bean crop the year before. So they were just volunteer beans, and then we'd spread the canola on top and dished it in.
Oh, yeah.
Has anyone else got any questions for Grant about what he's doing? Doing a lot of things there, Grant, and it's good to know that you're actually comparing things, which is what a lot of people don't seem to do.
Just wondering with so the livestock, so you just cattle on KI, is that just are you doing that on summer crops there with a more soil moisture, high rainfall, trying to get things down?
It was just we grew this Sudan and turnip sort of cover crop, and it grew 6 foot high, and we just didn't think we'd get through it, so we just got the neighbours' cattle to come in and chew it all down, and yeah, he paid us a bit to do it, which worked out all right. So it was certainly an option, and like last year we had all the fires that went through KI, and that burned a lot of our stubble, so we lost about 2,000 acres to the fires of residue, and so we planted all them down to cover crops. And so we had some cover on them, on those burnt paddocks, which and then because a lot of people didn't have the same, they lost all their paddocks and feed. Well, then we adjusted sheep and cattle on them to help people out. We didn't. So yeah, that's sort of what we did this year because it had burnt. And yeah, we got good rain after, and so seems to work quite well. Doing that, yep.
So you sowed that by flying it on and prickle chaining it?
No, the stuff that burnt, we actually put that down a disc seeder so that we didn't have any erosion.
Yep.
Yeah, it would have left it a bit pretty vulnerable if we had have run the disc chain over it after the fire, because there was no residue there at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, Grant, Darren here. Just you mentioned a couple of failures with your cover crops. What are you planning for? You going to keep going, or any suggestions to other farmers who have had those sort of similar scenarios?
Yeah, I'm going to keep going, especially this year, but I won't be doing it I won't be sowing one again unless we've got moisture. So I don't think we can. A lot of the blokes in the US were saying, "Oh, you just as soon as you're finished with the combine, you want to go out there and sow a cover crop," and that might work over there, but it certainly doesn't work here. We haven't. By the time when we're harvesting, there's no moisture left in the soil at all. The wheat's taken everything. The crops have taken everything. We're dry as a bone, and some years we don't. If you don't get a summer rain, you don't get any summer weeds, and if you don't get summer weeds, you're not going to get a cover crop up. So those years when you have to go and spray 2 or 3 times for summer weeds, they're the years when you grow a good cover crop, and you'll save yourself 2 or 3 sprays. The problem is you don't know when that year's coming. Like, you don't know whether you are going to get more rain in January and then more in February when you're sowing a cover crop in December. So
Would you just shoot out and sow it then if you got the rain?
Well,
that's what happened here this year. We had good early rains.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the window is quite wide too. Like, you don't have to have a cover crop sown in December or January. You can still put one in February. Like, they're a short season. They grow like steam. If you've got moisture and it's that hot during that time of year, you can still get a lot of benefit putting a cover crop in February. And then it starts cooling down. You start getting some dews into March. So March 10, you start getting some dew. So I don't think from previous attempts, I don't think I'll be that. You're not that. You don't have to be super early. Like, you can just hold off and see if you get 1 or 2 rains. And so, yeah, and I reckon a minimum you want 30 mil and then go and sow. Like, we've tried to do it on 15, we've tried to do it on 20, and it's that hot that time of year that 20 mil goes nowhere, especially if you've had a dry spring. So
a rainfall event or your soil moisture?
Well, it's a rainfall event.
Yep. So it'd be good to have a rule of thumb, and you probably have to do it through trial and error, or whether we can do it somehow.
Yeah, I think if
soil gurus.
if you're trying to sow a cover crop in our area before Christmas, you want at least 30 mil rain event, I reckon. When you get into January, you can, and you might have had a little bit during harvest, or a bit, like, if it keeps raining from now on and we get a wet harvest, well then you can go and sow it whenever you want. Like, but yeah, those years when you have a dry harvest and you're all finished by end of November or early December, even mid-December, and you finish harvest and you haven't had any significant sort of downgrades through harvest because of rain, you really want to wait for a wet pattern or a real big rain to go and spend that money on a cover crop.
Grant, how are you deciding which paddocks to sow your cover crops into? Is it into something that you're going to have wheat in the following season, or is it just a bit hit and miss, or have you got some sort of criteria for choosing?
We've done it in a few. We generally like to do them in our lentil stubbles because we want to build carbon and have more residue in them. We've got plenty of residue and carbon for the biology to eat in those cereal stubbles. So we want to put more cover and grow something on those lentil stubbles, and those legume stubbles generally have got more moisture at depth too, because the legumes don't have the same rooting depth. So if you can get a sunflower or a buckwheat or any of these sort of summer crops, or millet, sorghum, if you can get them established on a lentil stubble, they can get down pretty quick and start using some moisture that's there that the lentils didn't, or the legumes didn't. Whereas wheat will go down a metre and you know it's dry. Like, it's quite, and there's already residue there. So yeah, our intention is generally to put it on the least paddocks where we've got the least cover. Yeah.
And have you got an economical mix that you use for those cover crops?
Yeah, we don't use, well, we've tried a lot, but we spent a lot of money on some tillage radish there a couple of years ago, $7 a kilo or something, I think it was, and it grew, but it didn't help with compaction. The big bulbs come up out the ground when they hit something hard, so they don't. I thought it would be great to break up this hard pan and beat the compaction, but in actual fact, a real fibrous, thin root system like a millet will do a lot more for your compaction, will help a lot more for compaction than what a big root will. Like a big root will push up out the ground rather than going down when it gets hard. So we don't use tillage radish anymore. We try and use more high carbon plants. So those millets, sorghums, corn. Corn uses a lot of moisture. So a millet, sorghum is probably our two grasses that we try and use. They're quite good and they're cheap. Millet's only $1 a kilo. You can get we just buy it off farmers from in Queensland that have got seed. Send it a couple of bulker bags down on a truck. I don't buy certified seed. And then we try not to use too many legumes either. Like the legumes, well, once again, they don't add a lot of carbon. So we're putting it on a legume stubble, so we don't really need the nitrogen. And the mung beans, they're quite big. Like they need a lot of wetting up. So any small seeds are good, like a canola, a millet, linseed, and then throw in some I don't know. What else we got? Oh, we've got some buckwheat because it's real fast. Like we'll sow buckwheat this year. We might even that goes from planting to flowering in about 90 or less than 90 days. It cycles a lot of phosphorus. It's a good phosphorus scavenger. So buckwheat's another good one that you don't need a lot of moisture to get good benefit from. Canola and lentils and peas, even though they're winter crops, they seem to do pretty well during summer. Like they seem to get going and put a bit of biomass on. So yeah, no, we try and keep it under about $25 a hectare. Is all I'm really keen to spend. Yeah.
Just on the your marketing, you got somebody who does your marketing. You mentioned that you do into a couple of markets overseas. Is that just a family that's got that going, or is it someone else you've got involved?
No, so we employ a marketer. Like we run a company, Kangaroo on Pure Grain, which my father started, and then he retired, and we employed another CEO to run that company 3 years ago. So we employ him, and then we have a trader and a marketer, and then a couple of office staff that all employed by us. So they sell all the grain internationally. And we box it and export all ourselves at our own export facility at Osborne down Adelaide. So yeah, all the canola we produce goes to an oil mill in Japan, Harada Industries. So they pay a premium for Kangaroo non-GM canola. It's got to be a minimum of 45% oil for them to take it, which we generally get. And they've got to be, so they send a Japanese contingent out every year with a heap of people to have a look at the crops and have a look at them growing and the export facility and that sort of thing. All their wheat goes to Arnott's in Adelaide, and the soft wheat off KI goes to Arnott's for making Tim Tams and that sort of thing. And the raw beans all go to Indonesia, into the snack food industry. Malt barley goes to Adelaide to Coopers for malt. And our lentils, they go to Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, and they're boxed down there as well at a facility. So the only thing we put into the sort of grain crop of Viterra is our hard wheat and our feed barley that goes into the local port. Yeah.
So that's from both farms. You're doing that, Grant.
Yep.
And are you selling it as I don't know, chemical free or anything?
No, like the canola is GM free, which they pay a premium for, and for being off Kangaroo, and they pay a premium. But none of the other stuff is sort of, it's not organic. It's not anything special. But it's marketed it because we can tell them where it's traceable. It's 100% paddock to paddock traceable. So we grow it, we freight it, we clean it, we can size it, and we pack it, and then we export it. So it doesn't go into any other system except their own. And so that traceable is worth, it's well, it pays our freight. We get $70 a tonne premium on all our canola and wheat and barley because of that traceability, I suppose. Yeah, over port price.
So is that does that make it more profitable given that you've got extra people working and like there's a lot of extra work involved?
It's probably not more profitable.
More fun.
We employ there's 10 more. We employ 10 people to run that grain handling. So there's a 20,000 tonne site on Kangaroo, which has 3 staff that inloads and outloads all the grain all year. So there's 10 trucks on the ferry every day for the year that go over. So there's always outloading the grain every day, and then there's inloading at harvest, and there's cleaning. We've got gravity tables and sizing machines that clean all our grain and size it, and then can either put in bags or put in containers. So there's another 3 people that work on the container export facility on the port, and then there's the CEO, a trader, and 2 office staff at Mount Barker out of Adelaide. So there's 10 people we employ to do that, which is about $1 million a year in wages. So I don't think I don't think we're getting any more than anyone else by doing it, to be honest. But the potential's there too. Like, and we need that like it's $70 a tonne to freight grain off of KI. So it started out, to even be equal with everyone else, we had to make $70 a tonne premium, or we were selling feed barley 10 years ago for $150. We were getting 80 for it. We couldn't grow it for that. So we had to find a market that would pay a premium price. to find a market to pay a premium price, you had to employ people to do it. They had to travel around the world and find markets, and then you had to be completely traceable. So you had to have your own facility and storage and handling and exporting. So yeah, that's where it's sort of all evolved from, and I'd say we're treading water. Like it's it pays its way, but it just makes us level to everyone else that's not on Kangaroo Island, probably.
Yeah. There's a question there. Do you outsource any of your export grain?
Outsource any of our export?
It's from Dan. Do you outsource any of your export grain? Not quite sure what he said, but
Well,
So I think what he's asking is, do you buy from any other than Kangaroo Island people, I suppose, like
okay. Yep.
other farmers on KI. So do all the farmers on KI sell through your grain business?
Yeah, well, most of them. There's a couple. There's two, I think, that own their own trucks and deliver their own grain and don't use our facility. And so yeah, but most of the grain goes through our site on the island. We also buy broad beans from Millicent and the southeast, and we put them through our facility and sell them. So we will trade them, we'll buy them and then on sell them, and yeah, out of the southeast for that broad bean market, and we'll buy and sell fava beans and lentils from York Peninsula and Mid North. So yeah, we do have other grain that can go in as well, but they're generally back-to-back trades. They're not into these premium established markets for traceability. So there's two quite distinct markets. Yeah, we do third-party packing and that are there for other grains as well, but for other traders, but they don't. That'll just be $2 a ton, you know, to profit. It's not the $70 or $80 and $90 a ton traceability sort of, yeah.
Grant, can you we might wind it up soon, but can you just give us a bit of an idea of where you think you're heading in the next 5-10 years? As far as your soils and crops and, well, anything
Yeah,
like.
well, we're just, I'm probably, I think we've been a little bit minimalistic in our fertiliser use. Like we sort of always look at what we're using versus what we're applying, and we try and balance that out. But what we're finding is, I think we haven't been building a lot of soil organic carbon doing that, and I think we've been a bit light on with our nutrition. I really think we need more nitrogen to break down the stubble loads that we've got and to feed the biology. You need nutrition as well as carbon. So
yeah.
For all this residue you put back in, you have to add more residue, more nutrition to break that residue down and keep these microbes sort of growing, and then sort of they're making organic carbon. So I think we've been I still think, even though we're using manure, and we're still being pretty minimalistic at the amount of fertilizer we're using. We try and stay within a budget and everything, but I think we'll probably increase our fertilizer application as, like, with either more manure, go up to 3.5 ton instead of 2.5, and probably add some early nutrition to get that mineralisation happening without mining it. Like, every time we do a fertiliser budget, we factor in, we've got 2% organic carbon, that's going to mineralise, 80 units of N for the year, and we're using that 80 units to grow crops.
Yeah.
What we should be doing is leaving that 80 units there to build the biology and break down all the residue and adding more nutrition. So I read a great article in Ground Cover, in the GRDC Ground Cover magazine this last month, the September-October edition. I recommend everyone go and read it. It's a very fantastic article about long-term trials that have been done with no-till and full stubble retention, and with and without nutrition. And full stubble retention for 30 years, no-till, no cultivation, and keeping all the residue, hasn't grown their organic carbon. Whereas as soon as they've added 100 kilos of urea, like nitrogen, every year, post-harvest, like onto the residue,
yeah,
they've built heaps of carbon. So I think there's something we're missing there, that it's a balancing act. Instead of being really frugal about what you're taking off and what you're putting in, we're not accounting for what the microbes need to add to build carbon. So we may need all that mineralisation, that 80 units that we get for free from our organic carbon, that needs to stay there to build carbon. When you're keeping all your residue as well, to help break it down. So we're going to go towards that, and and then keep trying to reduce our use of fungicides and insecticides and herbicides, and use these other means, seed destructors, and we'll keep trialing organic products and different seed, biological seed dressings and biological sprays for fungicides. We've got another number of trials this year with, like I said, with this fish and kelp and molasses and different sorts of site-specific insecticides and fungicides sort of thing that aren't chemical. So we'll, trial and error on our own place. We'll look at all them and see if any work, and we'll see if they're all just snake oil. So,
if you didn't have that supply of manure close by, what do you think you would do?
That's an excellent question. I think I would certainly be trying to get hold of some sort of organic amendment, whether it be mushroom compost, whether it be green waste, whether it be anything, or would probably we'd probably go back to running a mixed operation and have some sheep or cattle putting manure in, walking around. I think it's really important. Like it's cornerstone to our operation up here to reduce how much synthetic fertiliser we use is that organic source. So I know we're quite fortunate with how close it is. But we've used a lot of mushroom compost as well from sort of 2 hours away. That's been, and we use that in our garden, and it's just magnificent stuff. Like it's so good. It's like peat. So anywhere that we've got some sodic soil or salt or anything like that, we use mushroom compost first rather than chicken manure, because chicken manure actually makes it quite acidic as well. It's got salt in it at high rates. So we do use other amendments that complement it in certain situations. So, and if you haven't got that, well, hopefully we get some summer rain, we can grow some cover crops and keep some cover on that way and add some more carbon in that way. But
Very good. Any more questions there for Grant? Otherwise, we might.
One last. So, sorry, I can't call the last one, but I'll ask a question. So the cover crops are just being grown in summer, but everything in winter is basically a crop. So whether it's a straight crop, an intercrop, a companion crop, but it's not you're not grazing a multi-species sort of mix in wintertime. You're leaving that for other things.
Yeah, we're not. we sort of we think that would be fantastic to do that, but we're not livestock people, so we have all our money tied up in machinery, and we try and use that as efficiently and optimise that over as many acres as we can. So I could see definitely if you were a livestock person that I would definitely be using multi-species covers during winter. Like they would grow fantastically over winter. Like so yeah. If you had a grazing arm to your operation, I'd definitely be doing that for sure. Yeah.
Do you think even cutting for hay or silaging or something like that could be an option if you use contractors to do that sort of? Do you think you would get similar sort of benefit? I mean, I know you're taking that green stuff away and you're not necessarily cycling it, but you're still getting that sort of root. You might be getting some bulk and then getting the roots, you know, what's happening below the ground happening. Is that could that, I mean, economically, I guess you have to weigh up between, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think like definitely you're still getting that underground diversity and different root architecture and different roots at different depths doing different things for your soil. So anything multi-species in together, I mean, has to be good for your soil, has to be good that for your biology and that diversity. But yeah, as soon as you're exporting that, I mean, it's different if you've got cattle or sheep grazing it, because each time they take a mouthful, it's stimulating that plant to grow again and exuding root sugars, and then they're leaving manure, you know, on your field. So you are taking a lot more doing hay. Like we do hay up at Pascaville, oaten hay, for export. And when we have a ryegrass problem or a real blowout, which I hate doing that. Like I hate, because you're exporting so much off your paddock in cover and carbon and it, yeah. And if we do oaten hay, we definitely sow that to a cover crop. Like that's one of the priorities after a hay crop, because you just leave it there. You leave it with nothing there. So yeah, grazing would be ideal, but if you were to do hay, I mean, you need a market for that hay, for a multi-species hay crop too, which I don't know if there is one, unless you had dairy farmers or something nearby. In our neck of the woods, it's oaten hay for export, or it's nothing. There is no domestic hay market. So it would be hard to get rid of a multi-species hay crop here, yeah.
And there was a bit of a question about hope for future income from carbon credits. Is that, I guess that's not necessarily why you're doing it. You can see the benefits for the cropping system, but yeah, what's your opinion about the carbon?
Yeah, well, it's certainly on the cards. Like I've had a couple of really good discussions over the last couple of years at Nuffield conferences and other sort of events I've been to about carbon credits, and yeah, I've met some people that are getting paid for sequestering carbon. I might have left it too late. Like you sort of want to start from a low benchmark and work towards it. So we're sort of, I don't know, it's bloody hard to sequester carbon. I've gone from 1.7 to 2 in 20 years. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to do it. You get 2 or 3 sort of dry years, and you lose carbon. So it's got so much to do with rainfall. Carbon, like you can grow a lot of carbon if it rains. Like when I was in Brazil, they're growing 3 crops a year, and they're sequestering 1% of carbon every 5 years. Because they got sunlight and they got rain, they get constant growth and constant things growing. But in our environment, where you haven't got a crop in for 6 months and you've got a fallow and it's hot, and you try and get a cover crop growing and it dies, it's hard to sequester that carbon. Yeah.
And I think that there's also, although I know you're talking about high rainfall and warm temperatures, I mean, they do have trouble even in the tropics sequestering carbon because of those, you know, because there is a lot of rainfall and heat. So the microbes are just going crazy and just chewing up any sort of carbon that's in the soil. So it's not actually staying in the soil. And that's sort of is happening with you. Continuous cropping, and you're talking about that mineralization, so that's why the carbon, it's just continually being cycled, but not necessarily stored. So
yeah, like I think in a grazing system, it'd be a lot easier to sequester carbon in a grazing sort of system than in a cropping system. But in saying that, I think if we get this relationship between carbon and nutrition and biology without killing it all with a lot of these products we use, I think we can still. Well, my goal would be to sequester another 0.5% in my career. So if I can get to 2.5% when I retire, I'll be very, very happy. So we'll see. Hopefully someone comes up with some other ways to do it quicker, but it's a grind. Yeah.
Grant, I've just got one more question that's a little bit tricky, but just on the seed dressing side of things, how do you see, if everyone stopped using seed dressings, do you think we'd run into strife?
I don't think you can just stop using seed dressings if you haven't got a pretty healthy, robust soil for a start. Like I'd be quite nervous about going 100% no seed dressings if you were seeing other problems, or if you were still in that synthetic system of full granular fur and then a fungicide program, an insecticide program, and lots of glyphosate use and no manure. I think you might run into trouble, definitely. We're easing into it a fair, like we haven't used a seed dressing on anything like for 3 years now, but we are seeing some root disease and I'm not sure if, and we're trying to not go back. We're trying to do it with nutrition rather than chemical. But you sort of got to have an understanding of what the plant needs early and why it's getting. Like a lot of people use a thing to coat their seed and it stops stripe rust. Well, stripe rust doesn't come in till late in the season, or like you're putting it on and getting 12 weeks of protection. Well, you don't need the first 12 weeks. Like that's not when you get rust. Or they're putting it on for rush and weed aphid. Well, they haven't got enough beneficials. Like your aphids won't be a problem if you've got heaps of lacewings and you've got heaps of ladybirds and you've got heaps of predators and spiders. So you're not going to have them if you've used an insecticide the year before. So if you're still doing a broad spectrum insecticide with your knockdown, you're probably going to have aphid problems, or you're probably going to have, you probably go, oh, it was a seed dressing, but it was probably that insecticide you used the year before, like that got rid of all your beneficials. Like, so it's a system. It's not just seed dressings. It's everything. Yeah.
Very good. Any more questions? Felicity, you've posted the ground cover article.
yeah, I think that's the one that Grant was talking about. And then there's also a paper there from the Agronomy Australia proceedings on soil organic matter and carbon sequestration, which is Clive Kirkby and Susan Orgel are co-authors on, and they are very experienced with soil carbon and soil organic matter stuff. So maybe worth a read.
I've got a question from Bronwyn. She says, are you worried about smuts and bumps? Grant.
Sorry, I just dropped out there.
There's a question here from Bronwyn Hunt. She says, are you worried about smuts and bunts?
Well, we keep an eye on them. I'm wondering when they'll come back, but no, we haven't seen any here since we've stopped using barley seed dressing. We've never seen a smut or a bunt on any heads. So yeah, I'm getting more and more confident that we're okay. Yeah, but yeah, we certainly, if we start seeing it, well, it's something that we religiously put some baytan on for smuts and bunts, but we're not, and we don't seem to be seeing it. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We might wind it up because that's a lot of talking from you, but that was great. Thank you, Grant.